dawn. The beginning of another day on the island of Bali. The sun pauses first on the horizon, then begins its fiery journey through the skies. Creatures of the land and birds of the air stir to wakefulness. Fish of the coral reef offshore resume their quests for food and safety. It has always been this way since the earth was new. Dawn held special fascination for early man. From the time he first walked on these shores, dawn has signaled the end to the fear and darkness of night. He was one of our earliest ancestors. We know him now as Java Man, and these were his islands. This is Indonesia. Hello, and welcome to the Foreign Mission Study for 1993. I'm Jim Bonds, and I'll be your guide through this beautiful and fascinating country of Indonesia. Through the ages, these islands have seen remarkable change, and yet there are places here where it seems time has frozen mid-stride. It's that melding of the old and the new that forms the basis for this year's mission study. Just as the dawn heralds the transition from night to day, from old to new, so too has the ministry of Southern Baptists seen transition and new beginnings. It hasn't always been easy, but from the beginning, Baptist missionaries have seen unmistakable evidence of the Holy Spirit at work here in Indonesia. And with God's leadership, they have charted new directions in ministry. This is their story. We're in central Java, and behind me is the Buddhist temple known as Borobudur. Built in the 8th and 9th centuries, it remained hidden for nearly 1,000 years before being rediscovered in 1814. Carefully restored in the 1970s, it's the largest Buddhist stupa or shrine in the world. But the followers of the Buddha make up only a small percentage of the peoples of Indonesia. And Java is one of more than 13,000 islands that make up this land. To understand Indonesia, we first must learn about the rich history and diverse cultures that make up this island nation. Indonesia spans more than 3,000 miles of land and water where the Indian Ocean gives way to the Pacific. It is the world's largest archipelago, or chain of islands, and may be the remnants of what was once a land bridge that joined Australia with the continent of Asia. Counted among her islands are some of the largest in the world: Irian Jaya, the western half of New Guinea; Borneo, which the Indonesians call Kalimantan; Sumatra; Celebes, also called Sulawesi; and Java. Indonesia lies on the equator and is home to more than 40,000 species of plants and trees. Much of Indonesia's geography and agricultural development has been strongly influenced by the hundreds of volcanoes that can be found on her islands. In 1883, the eruption of Mount Krakatoa altered the face of Indonesia and indeed much of the world for years to come. One of the most violent eruptions in recorded history, the volcano and its surrounding island all but disappeared from the peaceful waters between Java and Sumatra. The explosion blanketed nearly 300,000 square miles with choking ash and debris, and generated a tidal wave that devastated neighboring islands and cost more than 35,000 lives. Earliest recorded history of these islands dates back to the 5th century and a thriving civilization of people called the Teruma. They inhabited the western part of Java and apparently established early trade links with India. This contact with the outside world probably accounts for the early advances of the Hindu religion on Java. Over the coming centuries, Hindu and Buddhist dynasties alternately emerged and then faded in various parts of Java and Sumatra. These early kingdoms shaped the history of the region, but their greatest legacy may well be seen in the ornate temples built to honor their gods. In the late 13th century, the adventurer Marco Polo visited Sumatra and wrote of a new influence that had come to the islands: Islam. It was introduced by Arab merchants who plied the waters between the Middle East and the so-called Spice Islands. Islam would come to be the dominant religion of Sumatra and eventually all of Indonesia. By the 16th century, the wealth and beauty of the islands had attracted the attention of Europeans who wanted to exploit her bounty. First came the Portuguese and then the Dutch, who began a period of colonization in Indonesia that would endure nearly 350 years. By the turn of the 19th century, a general discontent was simmering among the island population. It gave way to open resentment against European domination, and in 1826 sparked a rebellion that lasted for 5 years and cost the lives of more than 200,000 Indonesians. Then in 1926, an enlightened and charismatic Javanese leader named Sukarno helped establish the Indonesian National Party, or PNI. He urged his people to unite and throw off the Dutch. This movement agitated for change over the next 15 years, but it wasn't until the arrival of the invading Japanese in 1942 that the determination of the Indonesian people to rid themselves of their captors finally crystallized. With the surrender of Japan in 1945 came a brief statement read by Sukarno on the front porch of his Jakarta home. It was August 17, 1945, and on that day, Indonesia proclaimed itself an independent nation. The Dutch resisted, but 4 years later, in 1949, amid bloodshed and growing negative opinion worldwide, they recognized Indonesian sovereignty, and the United States of Indonesia was born. In 1954, the official name was changed to the Republic of Indonesia. The joy of independence soon gave way to the daunting task of uniting such a diverse mixture of peoples and cultures behind the leadership of Sukarno. He was hailed as Bung Karno, or brother, and named president. In 1965, Sukarno's government withstood an attempted coup by the Indonesian Communist Party. Sukarno himself had considered the communists to be his allies, and his people blamed him in part for the bloodshed. The victory over the communists was due in large measure to the valiant efforts of a young general named Suharto, and 2 years later in 1967, he would replace Sukarno as president. In the months that followed the coup, there was a violent backlash against communism and its supporters. Outraged by the communist attempt, Indonesians enacted a remarkable law. Because the communists proclaimed themselves to be atheists, the government decreed that everyone in Indonesia must believe in God. Religion suddenly gained a new prominence as Indonesians scrambled to embrace a faith. Today, about 80% of Indonesians are Muslim, making it the largest Islamic nation in the world. Another 15% are Christian, with the rest claiming Buddhism, Hinduism, and other Eastern religions. But everywhere may be found traces of animism or spirit worship. The Indonesian people themselves are as diverse as the islands they inhabit. From the peoples of Western Sumatra with their distinct Malay heritage to the dark-skinned natives of Irian Jaya. They number more than 190 million. What they share is a common trade language, Bahasa Indonesia, a derivative of the Malayan language and the official language of the nation. But with literally hundreds of different ethnic groups in Indonesia, there are upwards of 400 regional languages and dialects. Add to this countless local customs and traditions, and you will find the Indonesian culture to be a vast potpourri of sights, sounds, smells, and tastes. The island of Kalimantan is crisscrossed with rivers flowing from the mountains in the north to the Java Sea. Many parts of the island are accessible only by boat. Port villages serve as storehouses for cargo in transit. Small craft laden with river rock are unloaded before returning for yet another haul. Upriver, village life is peaceful, and livelihoods are often tied to that which provides life's necessities. Steel is forged into sharp knives used to harvest rattan from the river. The rattan, in turn, is fashioned into traps for local fishermen or shipped elsewhere to be made into furniture. And everywhere you look, you find the innocence of children. Neighboring Sulawesi gives the appearance of a huge orchid blossom. The island is a leading producer of spices, including cloves. Raw cloves are actually buds of the clove tree that grow both wild and on plantations. They are picked by hand in September and October. Then the buds are spread on mats where they dry and turn the familiar dark brown. More sparsely populated than the islands of Sumatra and Java, both Kalimantan and Sulawesi have large concentrations of Christian inhabitants, many of whom trace their religious heritage back to missionaries of colonial times. Much of Irian Jaya is remote jungle inhabited by isolated tribes that have remained largely unknown to the outside world. The Irianese make up less than 1% of Indonesia's population. Bali is a relatively small island off the eastern tip of Java. It's the center of the Hindu population of Indonesia, and as such has resisted the influences of Islam and Christianity that have shaped much of the rest of the nation. Central to the Balinese culture is the ritual of deity and spirit worship, which pervades every facet of life on the island. Bali is also a major resort center for Indonesia, and much of her economy is based on tourism. Traditional Balinese dance is a staple of the tourist trade, and many ritual dances and celebrations are staged for the public. Accompanied by the staccato beat of the gamelan, these dances depict spirits and mortals in a never-ending struggle for terrestrial dominion.